The Sociology of Mass Media by Stephanie Reeves. In this presentation, we will go over subjects such as the power of the media, the impact of media ownership, and we'll also discuss some research around stereotypes and transmitting the meaning for audience, specifically around gender. The implications of the mass media on individuals and social groups can be broken down into two categories: whether the audience is passive or active in the consumption of media. Whether or not the audience are a passive consumer of media messaging or have a more active role will influence the implications of how people are actually affected by what they consume. The hypodermic syringe model infers that the audience is completely passive and that the content will be accepted by the audience. Like a syringe being injected and taking effect in the body, the content is injected into the audience and the message will be accepted. Supporting this model is a study by Bandura, known as the Bobo-Dahl experiment. Bandura was studying whether social behaviours such as aggression are learned by observation. The outline of the study is shown in figure 1 here. 72 children were separated into 3 groups. The first set of children was shown an adult displaying aggressive behaviour towards a Bobo-Dahl, and the second group was shown an adult displaying non-aggressive behaviour, and the control group was shown no model at all. The children were then taken into a separate room to be observed while playing with the toys. Children observing the aggressive model tended to display more aggressive responses towards their toys and imitated some of the aggressive behaviours shown by the models. McCabe and Martin argued that the media has a disinhibition effect on children, and that is where children believe it's acceptable to abandon the normal means of conflict resolution and resort to violence. Newson argued that children become desensitised to violence in the media and that they identify as perpetrators of violence, making them more likely to go on and enact violence themselves. The above theories all conclude that media influence is negative. However, there are theories that suggest that the hypodermic syringe model does influence people positively. Fersbach and Singer posited that when exposed to violence on screen, there can be a cathartic effect, and it provides a safe channel for aggression. And Young argued that seeing violence and its effects actually deters people from wanting to commit violence acts themselves, and this is known as sensitisation. The active audience model posits that the audience is active in the reception of media influence and that their participation affects the outcome. And there are several theories, and we'll explore 2 here. The selective filter model suggests that media messaging has an effect only when passed through 3 filters. The first, selective exposure. Audience chooses and makes decisions about what type of their content they watch or listen to. 2, selective perception. The audience can choose to accept or reject the message. And 3, selective retention. The audience must actually remember the content. The second theory is the 2-step flow model, introduced by Katz and Lazarsfeld. They posited that people are heavily influenced by the media through the interpretation of the social leaders of their particular group. People respect the opinions of their social leaders and will therefore accept their interpretation of the messaging. The first step is that the media content is consumed by the social leader and interpreted by them. The second step is that the information is passed on to the social group where it's internalised. The media message is therefore heavily influenced by the biases of the person who is the social leader and whether the content had a sensitising or desensitising effect on them. The mass media can be owned publicly or by private individuals or shareholder groups. Whether or not the media is owned publicly or privately can have huge influence on the content that is shown and how the information is presented. Publicly owned media can either be non-partisan or, if state-owned, can be biased towards the views of the state. The BBC is an example of publicly funded media which claims to be politically neutral. The BBC also relies on licence fees for funding and so does not need advertising revenue and so has no pressure to promote products or services. Privately owned media may be owned by individuals or shareholder groups. Privately owned media tends to be less objective since those who own the media outlet can influence the output in various ways. Directly, by expressly stating that the agenda must be followed, and indirectly, such as appointing editors with similar political values and influencing the culture of the organisation through the approach to journalism. The content that is presented to the public can therefore be biased towards the owner's own agenda, whether that be for political or economic reasons. The media has the ability to influence people by the content that's presented and the way in which it's presented. The media often uses stereotypes in its presentation. Stereotyping is a set idea of what someone or something is like, and especially an idea that is wrong. Using gender as an example, we'll analyse some of the research into how stereotypes transmit meaning and the effects of media representation. Tunstall determined that media representation of women focuses more on their domestic and sexual roles, rather than the achievements and contributions in the workplace, and as shown in this photograph, two Prime Ministers, Nicola Sturgeon and Theresa May, were subject to several sexist headlines throughout their tenure as leaders of Parliament of their respective countries. The consequence of this type of portrayal is an added pressure on women and girls to look and behave in certain ways. A study by Himanshu et al. Found that more girls were suffering from body dysmorphia than boys, and that number is rising. As in the photograph, women's achievements are trivialised in the media. Tuckman called this symbolic annihilation, where women's accomplishments are not as important as their physical attributes. This can result in women not being encouraged to participate in certain so-called male-dominated environments such as sports. A report by Sports Scotland looking into the lack of funding in women's sports found that underrepresentation of female role models in the media was a contributing factor. Supporting this, Newbold argued that women's sporting achievements are also overlooked. As a result, there are common misconceptions and casual sexism that arises, and some famous examples are where Andy Murray, the tennis player, has continuously corrected reporters who are misinformed and continue to erase women's achievements. Not all women's representation in the media is negative. Winship argued that women's magazines offer a diversity of opinions, and Gill noted that women are becoming more empowered in their representation and no longer merely an object of the male gaze. You can see here in this recent picture in Vogue, whilst still a fashion magazine, it is showing a more diverse representation of women. In conclusion, the way that women are represented in the media can have real-world effects on young girls, from eating disorders to participation in sports. Media owners have great power and influence, and consumers may have a choice of which media to consume, but this messaging itself may already be subject to bias and agenda.